You are 15 years old. You are sitting in a folding chair in the parish hall of Sacred Heart Catholic School in Indiana. It is a Tuesday afternoon. The fluorescent light above you flickers every 30 seconds. You have a spiral notebook open on your lap and a ballpoint pen that is almost out of ink. Sister Margaret is at the front of the room. She is explaining the women at the crucifixion. You are not really listening until she says a name. Mary Magdalene. Sister Margaret straightens slightly, the way teachers do when they are about to say something important. She says, Mary Magdalene had been a great sinner. She pauses. She says, a prostitute who Jesus forgave. You write it down. You do not question it. There is no reason to. This is the confirmation class of Sacred Heart Catholic School. Sister Margaret has been doing this for 23 years. The information is printed on the handout she distributed. You write it down because it will be on the test. You are 15. You will not think about it again for 30 years. Until one afternoon in your living room, you pick up the Gospel of Luke and read it from the beginning. You are not looking for anything in particular. You are just reading. You get to chapter 8, verse 2. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out. You stop. You read it again. Mary called Magdalene. 7 demons. No sin mentioned. No profession mentioned. You keep reading. You read to the end of chapter 8. You read chapter 9. You read forward through the whole gospel. The word prostitute does not appear. Not once. Not in connection with Mary Magdalene. Not anywhere. You put the book down. You think of Sister Margaret. You think of the handout. You think of the fluorescent light that flickered. And for the first time, you ask the question you should have asked at 15. Where did that come from? My name is Nathan. I taught history at a Catholic high school in Evansville, Indiana for 12 years. I know what it feels like to hand a student a piece of information without questioning where it came from. I did it hundreds of times. The Mary Magdalene question sat on my desk for 2 years before I really dug into it. I kept filing it away. Other things to research, bigger mysteries. But it kept coming back. Because the word prostitute is not in any gospel. Not in Matthew, not in Mark, not in Luke, not in John. That is not ambiguous. You can check right now. Open any Bible. Search the word prostitute. Search the word harlot. Search the word sinner in connection with Mary of Magdala. It is not there. So I went looking for where it actually was. And what I found was not a mistranslation, not a scribal error, not an honest confusion from 17 centuries ago that everyone has been too embarrassed to fix. What I found was a specific decision, made by a specific man in a specific year for specific institutional reasons, and I found that the Vatican knew about that decision, corrected it quietly in 1969, and never told the people sitting in the pews. Not in a homily, not in a pastoral letter, not in a single Sunday school handout anywhere in the world. Sister Margaret was still teaching it 20 years after it had been officially retracted. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because it is more complicated than one pope making one mistake, and more deliberate. Here is the first thing you need to understand. 1 in 4 Jewish women in 1st century Palestine was named Mary. That is not a figure I made up. That comes from Tal Ilan, a scholar at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Her 2002 work, Lexicon of Jewish Names in Late Antiquity, published by Mohr Siebeck, is one of the most systematic analyses of naming patterns in the ancient Jewish world. Ilan documented 317 female names from the period. 80 of them were Mary or Miriam or a variant of the same name. 80 out of 317, 25.2%, 1 in 4. Now think about what that means for anyone trying to write a historical document about a community of 1st century Jews. If you are writing about a group of women who follow Jesus, and you say simply, the women went to the tomb, and then a Mary spoke to the angels, and then a Mary ran to tell the disciples, and then a Mary brought spices on Sunday morning, your reader has no idea which Mary is which. Your document is useless. The Gospel writers knew this. That is why they used epithets. Mary of Magdala, Mary of Bethany, Mary the mother of James, Mary of Clopas. Geographic markers, family identifiers, relational anchors. The Bible is precise about which Mary is which because the Bible had to be. The name was too common not to specify. The modern reader sometimes sees the word Mary and assumes there is one Mary. There are 6, possibly 7. I want to introduce them, because until you can hold them separately, you cannot understand what was lost when someone collapsed them together. Mary number 1 is the one everyone knows, Mary, the mother of Jesus. She appears in the birth narratives at the crucifixion and in Acts 1 verse 14. No one has ever confused her with anyone else. Her role is too central. Mary number 2 is Mary Magdalene, Mary of Magdala. Magdala was a fishing town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, a real place with a real name. The epithet tells you exactly who this woman is and where she is from. She appears for the first time in Luke 8 verse 2. Among the women who traveled with Jesus and supported him financially, Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out. Financial supporter of the movement. Traveler in the inner circle, first witness at the empty tomb in all 4 Gospels. That is the entire biblical biography of Mary Magdalene. No profession named, no sin specified. 7 demons, in the first century understanding, meant serious illness, mental or physical. Not moral failure, not sexual transgression. Mary number 3 is Mary of Bethany, sister of Martha and Lazarus. She appears in Luke 10 and in John 11 and 12. Her village, Bethany, is 3 kilometers east of Jerusalem, on the other side of the city from the Sea of Galilee. In John 12, she anoints Jesus with expensive nard. In John 11, she weeps at the tomb of Lazarus. She is described as a devoted student of Jesus, sitting at his feet to listen. She is a Judean woman, from a named household with a named family. She is not Mary Magdalene. They are from different regions. They come from different stories. Every marker in the text distinguishes them. Mary number 4 is Mary of Clopas. John 19 verse 25 places her at the crucifixion, distinct from the others. Mark 15 verse 40 calls her the mother of James and Joses. A different woman, a different family, a different story. Beyond those 4, there are at least 2 more. Mary, the mother of John Mark, running a house church in Jerusalem in Acts 12. Mary of Rome, greeted by Paul in Romans 16 as someone who worked very hard for the community. 6 women, possibly 7. The scholars at Brigham Young University's Religious Studies Center count 6 or 7 distinct Marys in the New Testament, none of them confused before the year 591. That is a very specific year, and a very specific document. I want to tell you how I found it. I had been teaching adult Sunday school for about 2 years when I decided to prepare a lesson on the women at the tomb. I thought it would be straightforward. Identify the women present, explain their roles, teach the resurrection narrative from their perspective. I pulled out a legal pad and started listing the Marys. Name, gospel reference, key characteristic. I got to 4, then 5. Then I stalled. I realized I had never thought clearly about how many there were. I had been teaching history for a decade, and I had never actually mapped the Marys against each other in a systematic way. I got out a concordance, and I started noticing something. The epithets. Mary called Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, Mary the mother of James. The gospel writers had been careful, unusually careful for ancient documents. They had built a system of identification into the text. And then I started checking the tradition. The commentaries, the homilies, the catechetical texts. The system had been dismantled. Somewhere between the Gospels and the tradition, the epithets had been stripped. The careful distinctions the writers had built had been collapsed into a single composite woman. And I found the moment it happened, a Sunday in Rome, September of 591 CE. Pope Gregory I stood before his congregation and delivered what would become known as Homily 33. I found a translation in a patristics collection. I read it, and I had to read it twice. Because what Gregory did in that single sermon was methodical. It was not confusion, it was consolidation. Here is what Gregory said. He took 3 separate gospel passages and merged them into one woman. First, Luke 7 verses 36 through 50. An unnamed woman, the text does not give her a name, enters the house of a Pharisee named Simon, while Jesus is dining there. She weeps at his feet. She wipes his feet with her hair. She anoints his feet with perfume. Jesus forgives her sins and calls her a woman who has loved much. Note, she is never named. She is never identified geographically. Her sin is not specified. She is simply an unnamed woman with a history Jesus forgives. Second, Luke 8, verse 2. The first mention of Mary Magdalene among the women who traveled with Jesus. 7 demons cast out. Financial supporter of the movement. No sin referenced. Third, John 12, verses 1 through 8. Mary of Bethany anoints Jesus with nard at a dinner in Lazarus's house 6 days before Passover. Judean setting, named household, specific occasion, 3 passages, 3 women. 2 of them named with geographic specificity, 1 of them unnamed. Gregory said they were all the same woman. In his own words, she whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary, we believe to be the Mary from whom 7 evil spirits were ejected according to Mark. She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, the unnamed sinner from Luke 7. John calls Mary, Mary of Bethany from John 12. Mary from whom 7 evil spirits were ejected. Mary Magdalene from Mark and Luke 8. 3 women, 1 papal declaration, 1 sermon, 591 CE. The merger was complete, and the woman who emerged from that merger was not any of the 3 women in the texts. She was something new, a composite, the former prostitute who had been healed, who had sat at Jesus' feet, who had anointed him with oil, who had been at the cross, who had been first at the tomb. The most dramatic arc in the New Testament. The greatest sinner who became the first resurrection witness. It is a powerful narrative. It is also a fabrication constructed from 3 separate women by a man writing 600 years after the fact. You open your Bible to Luke 7. You read the unnamed woman's story. She enters Simon's house. She weeps, she anoints, Jesus forgives her. You search for her name, it is not there. You read forward to Luke 8. Mary Magdalene appears for the first time, 2 verses later, in the next chapter, as if Luke himself knew these were different women and separated them by 2 chapters on purpose. You check Luke's geography. The unnamed sinner story happens somewhere in Galilee, in a Pharisee's house. Mary of Bethany's anointing happens in Bethany, in Judea, in her brother Lazarus's house. Different region, different family, different occasion, different gospel. The Bible did not merge these women. One man merged them, on one Sunday morning, in Rome, in the 6th century. And the tradition accepted it for 1400 years. Here is what I am still working through. Because Gregory was not a fool, he was one of the most capable administrators in the history of the papacy. Scholars call him Gregory the Great. He organized the church's response to the plague, restructured the liturgy, sent missionaries to England. A man of that intelligence and that institutional precision does not accidentally merge 2 women from different regions with different family names, from different gospel accounts separated by 2 chapters in the same gospel. He made a choice, so I had to ask, what did that choice accomplish? And the answer required me to go back to Mary Magdalene, not the composite, the real one. Mary Magdalene, as she actually appears in the text, is the primary witness to the resurrection. All 4 Gospels agree on this. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, John 20. She is first, or among the first, at the empty tomb. John 20 verses 11 through 18 give her the most extended post-resurrection encounter in any Gospel. Jesus appears to her alone. He speaks to her. He gives her a commission. Go and tell my brothers. That commission is the original Easter announcement. Go and tell the first post-resurrection proclamation, given to Mary Magdalene. In the early church, the theologians who did not follow Gregory's tradition called her Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles, the one who told the apostles that Jesus was risen. That is extraordinary authority, but there is a problem with that authority. Paul wrote the foundational creed of Christian resurrection belief in 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 through 8. He lists the witnesses to the risen Christ: Cephas, then the 12, then 500 brothers, then James, then all the apostles, then finally Paul himself. He does not mention Mary Magdalene, not once. The most prominent eyewitness in the Gospel accounts does not appear in Paul's list. She was there, she was first. Every Gospel says so. Paul leaves her out. The institution that inherited Paul's authority had built into it from the beginning a tendency to minimize or erase her witness. Gregory's 6th century homily was not the beginning of that tendency. It was its completion. By attaching the identity of a penitent sinner to the primary resurrection witness, Gregory transformed her authority. She was no longer the first to witness the risen Christ. She was the fallen woman who had been forgiven. Her credibility rested on her gratitude, not on her testimony. Her witness became secondary to her redemption. The institution that could not accommodate a woman's founding authority had found, in Gregory's homily, a theological framework that neutralized it, not by erasing her, by redefining her. Think about that for a moment. Every word she spoke at the empty tomb was already in your Bible. Every word of her commission was already there. Go and tell. The institution did not erase the words, it changed the person speaking them. If Mary Magdalene is the apostle to the apostles, she is a founding authority of the church. If she is the penitent prostitute, she is a cautionary example. Same words, different weight. And the only difference between those two readings is a 6th century pope deciding that 3 women were 1 woman. I want to be precise about the timeline. Gregory delivered homily 33 in 591. 1,378 years later, the Vatican corrected him. In 1969, Pope Paul VI completed the post-conciliar reform of the general Roman calendar. The calendar is the official liturgical document that tells the Catholic Church what to commemorate on each day of the year. The July 22nd entry had always honored Mary Magdalene. After the reform, a footnote was added. I found that footnote. It says in the formal language of the Vatican that the July 22nd feast commemorates only St. Mary Magdalene, to whom Christ appeared after his resurrection, not about the sister of St. Martha, nor about the sinful woman whose sins the Lord forgave. Read that again. Not about the sister of St. Martha, not about the sinful woman. They separated them, officially, in writing, in the calendar that governs every Catholic liturgical practice worldwide. In 1969, no encyclical was written, no pastoral letter was sent to parishes, no homily was drafted explaining to the people in the pews what had been changed and why. No Sunday school handout was revised, no catechism was updated with an explanation. The correction was placed in a footnote in a calendar that most Catholics have never read, and the tradition continued as if Gregory had never been wrong. You are sitting in a pew. Maybe it is 10 years ago, maybe it is 20, maybe it is your childhood. A priest stands at the front of the church. He is reading from Luke. He reaches the story of Mary Magdalene. He says what priests have said for 14 centuries. He describes her as a great sinner, a woman of questionable past, redeemed by grace. That priest was born after 1969. He was ordained after 1969. He was trained in a seminary whose curriculum was shaped by the post-conciliar reforms. The calendar footnote existed before he was ordained. The correction existed before he was assigned to that parish. He never knew. Nobody told him either. The correction lived in a footnote. The tradition lived in the homilies. And the tradition was louder. There is more. In 2016, Pope Francis took a step that Gregory would have found incomprehensible. On June 10, 2016, the Vatican issued a decree elevating Mary Magdalene's feast day. Not from feast to solemnity, that distinction is technical, but from a simple memorial to a full liturgical feast. The significance is in the language. The decree called her Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles, the first witness of the resurrection, equal in commemorative weight to the male apostles. The Vatican in 2016 restored the title the early church had given her. The title Gregory's homily had spent 1400 years dismantling. But the decree did not name Gregory. It did not explain the 1400-year detour. It did not say, for over a millennium, your tradition taught you something we now acknowledge to be incorrect. It simply elevated the feast, as if the prostitute had never been invented, as if the homily had never been delivered, as if the calendar footnote from 1969 had never existed. The correction happened without the explanation. The restoration happened without the reckoning. I spent part of last winter with J.J. Benítez's Caballo de Troya, specifically the sections where he works through the women around Jesus. Benítez distinguishes the Marys with a precision the official church took 14 centuries to reach. He treats Mary Magdalene as what the gospel texts actually describe: a woman of means, possibly a property owner given Magdala's commercial position as a fishing town, who used her resources to fund the movement. The Greek word in Luke 8 verse 3 for the women who supported Jesus financially suggests independent wealth. Mary Magdalene is named first among them. First in a list is not an accident in ancient texts. It indicates prominence. Benítez treats Mary of Bethany as a separate individual, the devoted student, the grieving sister, the woman who understood what the anointing meant when even the disciples did not. A different household, a different temperament, a different story. His 40 years of investigation converge on one conclusion. The conflation was not a reading error. Her 6th century administrator with the intellectual capacity to reorganize the church's missionary strategy does not accidentally conflate two women with different names from different regions in different gospel accounts, separated by 2 chapters in the same book. The conflation was an editorial decision made with full knowledge of the texts, sustained by an institution that found the composite more useful than the original. And then there is the question of what was lost. When Mary Magdalene became the composite, something specific disappeared: her precision. She is the only figure in the Passion narrative who is present at all 3 decisive moments: the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection. Matthew 27 verse 56, she is at the cross. Matthew 27 verse 61, she is at the burial. Matthew 28 verse 1, she comes to the tomb. She witnesses the death, the interment, and the empty tomb. She can provide chain of custody testimony for the most important sequence in Christian history. I know that sounds legalistic, but think about it as a historian would. If you wanted to establish that the body placed in the tomb was the same body that was later gone, you would want a witness who was present for all 3 events. Mary Magdalene is that witness. She is the only figure who appears consistently across all 3 in the Matthew account. She is also, in John's Gospel, the one who first recognizes the risen Jesus. Not Peter, not John, not any of the 12. Mary of Magdala, the woman Gregory turned into a prostitute. Now let me tell you what you are not. You are not confused. When you read Luke 8 and could not find the word prostitute, you were reading accurately. When you felt, sitting in the pew, that the story of Mary Magdalene was more complicated than the version you received, you were feeling the weight of what had been stripped away. You were not projecting onto the text, you were reading the text. The Bible was careful about which Mary was which. 25% of all Jewish women were named Mary. The writers knew. They used epithets. They protected the distinctions. Mary called Magdalene Mary of Bethany, Mary of Clopas. The protective system was in the text. One man in the 6th century decided to remove it. Your instinct that something was off was not doubt. It was literacy. You were reading what the Bible actually said, and finding it did not match what the tradition claimed it said. You were right. Tal Ilan's data confirms you were right. The patristic scholarship confirms you were right. The Vatican calendar revision of 1969 confirms you were right. The decree of 2016 confirms you were right. The institution itself has confirmed twice in the last 60 years that you were right. It just did not use those words. I think about the confirmation class sometimes, not with anger, something more complicated than anger. A 15-year-old writes down what Sister Margaret says: Mary Magdalene, prostitute, forgiven. The ballpoint pen runs out of ink on the word forgiven. She caps it, digs in her bag for another one. She keeps writing. She will pass the test. She does not know that the word she is writing was placed in that handout by a chain of transmission beginning in 591 CE. She does not know that in 1969, A Vatican calendar footnote separated the woman from the construction. She does not know that 50 years after the correction, she is still being handed the uncorrected version. She does not know any of this. She is just trying to find another pen, and somewhere inside her there is already a question she does not yet have the words for, a sense that the story does not quite fit the text she will read later, a feeling that something important has been collapsed into something simpler. That feeling is accurate. It will take her years to find out why. But when she finds Luke 8 verse 2 for herself and reads the words Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, precise, geographic, specific, nothing about sin, nothing about profession, she will recognize it, not as a new discovery, as a confirmation of something she always sensed. The Bible was careful. One man was not. And the institution he ran kept the carelessness in place. Until a footnote in 1969, until a decree in 2016, both of which arrived too late for the confirmation class at Sacred Heart. This is Nathan, Forbidden Gospels. The 3 Marys were always distinct. The Bible was always careful. The correction was always real. You decide what to do with this.